Hello and welcome to Milestone Mindset Live. We have a very, very special show today talking about suicide and trauma response for youth. I'm here with Maureen Brogan from the Trauma and Loss Coalitions for Youth, part of Rutgers Behavioral Health. She'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. And before we get started, though, I'd like to just express that the Milestone Mindset Live show is an honor and responsibility and privilege that I have to bring guests of my choice to help people in business or in life to help them then succeed in their business or school. And I don't know anyone anymore that has not been touched by loss or worry or concern for suicide in my home state or actually in the world. Anyone I know anywhere has been touched. So we're going to jump into this. The sequence we intend to do is get you some hard-hitting information up front on where to get help. Maureen's going to share her background as well. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about other things that can help reduce stigma, help people talk about it, and so on and so forth. So Maureen, welcome. And thank you for being with me today.
Nancy, thank you so much for the invite. And thank you for all the people that have logged on that have the courage to have this conversation, to have the courage to say, I want to learn more. I need to learn more. I'm okay with hearing that word suicide, because the word suicide in and of itself is it's a tough one. A lot of times people can't even get the word out of their mouth. And if you happen to do suicide prevention or intervention or postvention like I do, it's one of those topics where people don't really care what you do when you're talking at a cocktail party. They're like, oh, they hear the word that you do suicide prevention and all of a sudden no one wants to talk to you at the cocktail party. So I just want to say thank you. I want to start off with so much gratitude for all of you who are taking time out to hear this important message. Like Nancy said, I'm Maureen Brogan. So I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm a diplomat in trauma response work, and I'm a mom. And I think I never want to minimize that. I really should start off with that, because I think that's the part when we talk about suicide prevention, when we talk about mental health, and I'll talk a little bit more why we call it brain health, is that's like my heart. And when my child's hurting, I just want to know, I want to make it better. And just like when they were little and they fell and you picked them up and you wiped off their scratched knee, it's like when someone, especially someone you love, is struggling and they're struggling. And they may not be able to ask for help. So how do we get them the help that they need? How do we help people ask for help? So besides being a licensed professional counselor, I always had done trauma work. So I started off, saying, I'm going to work with trauma victims of all different sorts. And then I was asked to work on the 9/11 project after 9/11 by former Governor McGreevey, and worked with the 9/11 families and with the trauma there, and then did a lot of additional work. And then the opportunity came, and I think we're called into places. I didn't go looking to do more trauma work. It kind of came to me to say, hey, someone's retiring from Rutgers-UBHC. There's this program called the TLC, which I had heard of. And the Traumatic Loss Coalition is really, I have the best job in the state of New Jersey. And some people would kind of say, how can you say that? Trauma, loss are like right there in your job title. And I say, yes, but unlike a lot of people, I get to be part of the healing. And that's what I'm hoping too, that some of you who hear this message today walk away with that thought of like, okay, this can be really, really scary stuff, but I can be part of that healing process. I can be that connector. I can be that person. I'm not going to ask all of you to go out there and be clinicians. I'm a clinician, and I'll be transparent, was not trained in suicide prevention. So I had clients and I worked with adolescents, did not have formal education in suicide prevention. We're doing better in New Jersey. We're moving in that direction so clinicians have more training. But I think it really hit me when I started doing this work to say, this suicide prevention is not just in the world of mental health. And the language too, just so people understand, is suicide is a public health issue. There's a reason they call it public health, because it's not an education issue. It's not a faith-based issue. It's not a mental health issue. It's not a first responder issue. This is a human being issue. So welcome to the human race. You are now in this with me to be like, you're part of the solution. You can be part of this safety net that we look out for each other. And I love that we've made that turn, as opposed to just saying, suicide kind of falls with depression and anxiety. Sometimes, not always. It's a public health issue, which means if you're a human being, you're potentially at risk. So I want people to understand too that there are risk factors and protective factors and warning signs. And at another time, we could go through all of that. But really, what I'd like to just focus on is saying, what can we do? What can we do differently? How do we get the conversation going? And that's really like the thrust of it, is how do we be fearless and say, I'm okay with having the conversation? How do I get to the point where I'm okay asking someone, are you feeling suicidal? Are you thinking about ending your life? Do you feel like going to sleep and never wake up? Like, isn't that scary stuff to ask? Scary stuff to ask. I don't know about you, but this would be me. La, 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 please, please, please. Like, I would want the answer to be like, no, I'm not feeling that way. But as we know, there are people that have suicidal ideations. People can be in that dark place. And we need to be prepared as a society to say, it's okay not to be okay. I'm here. I have resources that I can share with you. You are not alone. And that's the other message too about the you are not alone. In the field of trauma, we know that connection is protection. So if you think about it, one of the most important things that we have as human beings is connectedness to other human beings. We are social creatures. Like, we thrive in social entities. We were not meant to be isolated and working alone, which again, for another podcast at some point, that's what COVID did for a lot of people. Isolated. It took away some of that connection. It also pushed, especially for our young people, pushed them more into the digital and the online world, because they weren't seeing their friends. So with that became a blessing and a curse, a mixed bag of how are they connecting. It was great that they could still connect, but for many others, it also became like more isolating. And then we started to return, and they were still relying on like the social media aspect of it, as opposed to that interpersonal connection.
Maureen, I want to comment on a few things. You just shared so much information, and a few things of my takeaways, what you said, and I'd like you to comment on them, is that we talked about this is public health, and then we talked about individuals, and public health is really a group of individuals. This is, as I said early on, we are all touched by this. And we're not here to have anyone take on a role that they're not qualified to do, right? As a mom, as a friend, as a wife, as a colleague, not trained in medical health or of any kind, physical, brain, mental health, or otherwise. But in my job, I've spent the majority of it in healthcare marketing and education, schools and such. And so we are not trained in that. But what you're talking about is offering connection and resources. Now, if you are suffering from various brain health concerns, you very often are isolated, COVID or not. If you're not feeling well, you don't necessarily want to interact, from what I've seen. And also, people don't understand how to interact with you. And so this is a really important point, that my interpretation is what you're saying, as individuals, if we are just a little bit aware that people are going through this, and some of the people that I know that we have lost, you would never know they were suffering. They are were the most outgoing, friend to all people. So we just never know. So public really means individuals in a group setting. Public means there's resources for it. Connection, it's the challenge of this disease that we're talking about. And so, yeah, you certainly are going to come back, and we're going to have lots more to talk about. But I think it's important to maybe at this point, let's talk about some of those resources. Let's talk about what TLC is and does, and share. Let's get some resources right in the middle of this.
So, and I thank you, Nancy, too, because the ticker going across the bottom of the screen actually gives the information of the phone number of how to reach the Traumatic Loss Coalition, as well as our website. And the TLC, and I love actually that it's TLC, it's because it has trauma and loss in it. But when you go and you respond and you say, I'm with the TLC, I can't tell you how many times young people are like, oh, you're with Tender Love and Care. And we're like, yes, we are. And in many ways, I have to chuckle a little, because that's what the TLC is. The Traumatic Loss Coalition is, and this is the part where I kind of brag about New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
New Jersey has this system in place, and has since 9/11, that when something traumatic happens, you have a county coordinator that has underneath and behind them a trained team, a response team that can go in and help stabilize and offer psychological first aid in that initial aftermath of getting bad news. And bad news could be a loss of, by a disease, car accidents, and suicides tend to be one of the most difficult ones to respond to, especially when a young person has taken their own life. And if you can imagine, we've responded, unfortunately, to an 8-year-old taking their own life. And you say, how can you be on this earth for 8 years and just think that there's nothing that life has to offer in your mere 8 years? So it's not common, it's rather infrequent, but it does happen. So the Traumatic Loss Coalition can get a call from a school or any youth serving organization. So you could be a travel soccer team. You could be, we've been called in by lifeguards, because over the summer they're not in school, but the lifeguards are rather close and there's been a loss, and we've gone down to the beach and done responses for lifeguards at the beach. Because when an event happens, it's not only happening to that person and their family, it's also happening to all the people that they touched upon. And when you think about a student, and there was a time too, we're finding more and more as time goes on, that there's so many things that are beyond just the school. We used to respond to a school and be pretty sure that we got most of the kids that these kids interacted with. Now it's like, oh, they're on travel this, or they go to another county, or they go to a private school. They live in this town, but they go over here. So we know when there's a loss that it impacts even more than just that school community. And we can be called in to assist and support. And I do say called in. It literally is a call from someone in charge inviting us in. So I like to make that clear too, is that the TLC will never self-deploy. We hear of a lot of losses, and we would never just show up to be like, we're here to help. We really build relationships. So hopefully people will call us, but we have to be invited in. And then when we're invited in, we can start doing this work. Like I had mentioned, psychological first aid. It's really about helping stabilize and get people to be like, it's not therapy. And that's the other thing that I love. Being a therapist myself, there is a time and place for therapy. It's not therapy. This is stabilization. This is to help folks tap into their own resiliency so they can move through or move forward. Nancy, I see you shaking your head, and I was like, okay.
Yeah, no, let's get really, really tactical here, though. Let's explain exactly what TLC is and does. We don't have to. So yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So we're a network.
And who is it for?
Yeah. So we're a network for providers, and we provide services for youth and or schools and communities where they work with youth. And we also what?
Hold on. I think I spoke over you when you started to say that. Oh. So I'm going to say it. I'm going to let you say that again.
Sorry. So the Traumatic Loss Coalition is a network of these responders and of people in every county that have been trained to do response work as well as suicide prevention work. because not all responses are the same. And also too, our mission really is, when we're called in to support and help after a loss, the number one rule is do no harm. Like, we are not, you want to leave there making things better, not making things any harder or worse than they were before you were called in. So we have people that are carefully trained on how to do response work, which means a lot of mind-body work. It means having a lot of experience with trauma, and also too about the brain, and not in the sense of neurobiology. I do not have a bunch of neurobiologists. I have a lot of lay people that volunteer to do this work, and we train them. And it's about that compassionate presence, knowing what to say, knowing how to deliver psychological first aid, knowing how to have the conversation and how to start conversations. And it's that compassionate presence that the TLC works with, like the administration. And then it's almost like the trickle down at the same time. It's like the pushing up. So we're working with all the way to the top of the superintendents, or sometimes like CEOs or COOs of organizations. But you're also too, this is for everybody. Like, when there's a loss, everyone has been impacted on some level. When we go into schools, it's like, who's checking in on the coaches or the custodial staff or the bus drivers? Like, they also lost someone. Someone was on their bus route, and now they're stopping at that stop, and that kid's no longer getting off. That could be very traumatic. So our teams are really trained to be like, who is being impacted, who's impacted the most, and how do we wrap supports around them? And it's not to do it for them, because that's the other part too, is we're really big on tapping into people's own resiliency. Because you know what, you can call the TLC, and we'll be there a couple of days to add support, but we're not going to be there for the weeks and months afterwards that you're still going to be doing some grieving, doing some work to get back to quote unquote normal. So really what our work is to help you or your organization tap into those. And if you feel like, wait, we don't have resources, then we also say, well, let us tell you, let us guide you a little bit. Do you have, and now I'm hoping everyone's aware, but if you're not, the Lifeline number is now 988. So you can just dial 988 if you're concerned about somebody, or if you're concerned about yourself and want to talk to someone. So that was the Lifeline number. And then legislation went through and they shortened it to a 988 number. And isn't that great? Because when you're working with people, that's not a difficult number to remember. However, I work with a lot of adolescents. So I say, humor me, will you just put that in your phone? The other thing too is the crisis text line. It's 741-741. And here in New Jersey, you can either type NJ and to 741-741. You could type home to 741-741. And even if you just text it in with nothing, you're going to get a text back. 24/7, someone always gets back to you. Great resource, because especially when you're working with young people, that, I don't know, they seem to like 2 a.m. conversations. Sometimes there's not trusted adults. There's not parents up at 2 a.m. There's not teachers available. There's not coaches available at 2 a.m. Crisis text line, they can have a conversation. And I also like 988 and the crisis text line, because they also have the capacity to then deploy additional support out if that person's really in such a crisis that they might need some immediate attention. They have resources to then like ping the phone and get other resources to do it, like almost an emergency response. So those are just an example of two of the resources that we'll share when we're out there with the TLC, to be like, hey, make sure you have these numbers. Make sure your students know these numbers, that these are available. There's no charge, and they're anonymous. Like, you don't have to share your name if you don't choose to share your name. And they're at hours that, like I said, a lot of times other adults or other people are not available. So again, I talk about, it's the connection, it's the support. We also do suicide prevention work, which, trust me, you can ask any of my team members. We'd much rather do suicide prevention work than what you hear me say postvention, is when we've actually lost someone to a suicide. So we'll do, we in particular deliver what we call QPR, which is question, persuade, and refer. And that's just a gatekeeper model. And one of the reasons we love that model is it goes again about that creating the safety net. Anyone can be a gatekeeper. We should all be gatekeepers. That's really being that I'm a keeper of my neighbor, of my friend, of my colleague. Like, I look out for other people and hopefully they're looking out for me. And they're not clinicians and they're not screeners. They are just people that have the knowledge on how to ask someone if they are feeling suicidal. And if the answer should be yes, through the training, we're hoping that people become more comfortable with being like, okay, you're reporting you're having some suicidal ideations. How can I persuade or convince this person to go with me to get some additional support? What we do know in the field with suicide is a lot of people won't ask for help. People have actually been to their physician, and it makes sense. When you're in like what I call psychic pain, a lot of times you're also in physical pain. So you may not go and reach out to anyone in the mental health world. You might go to your primary. You're feeling off, you're not feeling good, you're feeling lethargic, you feel achy and pains. You just don't feel right. We're getting better with our doctors, nurses asking the questions, are you feeling suicidal? So that's a great safety measure for all of us to feel like, okay, now we have our physical health being taken care of, but they're not afraid to go to that mental health. And again, we're still pushing, instead of mental health, to call it brain health, because the brain is like an organ. And I work with young people, and when you say like mental health, sometimes too, they're like, oh yeah, we did a little bit of that in health class. That's if you're this or depressed, and they go through a couple of things, and it's great that they know that, but you get more of a conversation going when you talk about brain health. When people see like, wait, this is not just me like imagining that things are bad or imagining that I'm sad, or it makes it real for them. Because when you talk about the brain, they're like, yeah, the brain is an organ. This is not made up. This is not something you can just tell someone like, can't you just get over that? Because it's real. So we're trying to change some of the language when we work with youth serving organizations to be like, can you refer to it more as brain health? Because it normalizes the conversation. Someone still might need additional support. That's okay. But if you had a bad heart, you probably need some additional support there too, and you would go get it, and you wouldn't ask a second question. And even too, as parents, we would run our kids to a specialist if we were concerned about their heart. And I think that's the same thing. If people thought of brain health in the same way, I think we'd be a little more apt to go ask for help and to seek it out.
Yes. Another point that's coming to my mind while you're talking, and you've touched on it, no health is usually a one and done, right? When we're talking about brain health, it's in my personal experience, I'm not a professional, as we said, but someone doesn't get a cut and it bleeds. And brain health, it's connected to other organs in your body. It's one body, but it can sneak up on you and it can persist. And it can be a long road. And we are specifically talking about brain health today, suicide brain health. And there's other components of brain health. But I'd like to make that point for anyone who has a loved one suffering, or if you're suffering, and I don't remember, Maureen, if you said this while we've been live or before, but it is an ongoing situation and it's a long-term situation. Mm-hmm. So what I want to do before we get too much further is I'd love for you to state the specific kind of organization that is your TLC's primary organization. For example, a school, and who from that school would be the one to call you, mm-hmm. or if someone else wanted to, how you would. So let's maybe list a few. A school and this, another organization and that. Let's be real specific.
So anyone can reach out to the TLC. So it could be a parent, it could be anyone can reach out to us. But what you'll hear on our end is, in order for us to quote unquote like be deployed, in order for us to physically show up, we need to be invited in by someone who has authority. So it's usually like a principal or superintendent, a vice principal, or like I said, it could be, if you're in the Girl Scouts, it would be like, is the Girl Scout leader like inviting us in? If it's faith-based, is it the pastor? Is it someone who's in charge? So we just need that permission from that person to invite us into their place of where they operate from. But anyone can reach out to the TLC, because if we're not actively going out, we can supply you with a lot of resources. And there are times when people reach out to us. It could be a school and they're like, we don't know if we need you because we have counselors here. We just wanted to know, what should we be doing? Do you have some resources? So that's one thing that I would say is like, don't hesitate to call, because you're like, I don't know if the principal's going to let you come in, but I wanted to share with you, we had this loss, because we can share information with anyone else. We just won't physically go to a site unless we're invited in. So the number that, is going across the bottom of the screen is a number that you can call. And also on the website, you can directly call your county coordinator. And they will be transparent with you about, okay, this is who we would need permission from in order to actually physically go. And then they would seek that approval. And sometimes it's like, no, we think we have it handled. And they do have it handled. They just needed additional resources to go out. So it's really, so I would say almost anyone can call based on what the response would be, is it someone in authority asking us to come out and they want us to actually do a whole response, or are they looking for more like resources and guidance? Because sometimes our responses might just be myself or one of the coordinators guiding the school on like, okay, did you do this? And you need to have this in place. And how are you taking care of the students? How are you taking care of your staff? And we give them the guidance to do it because they have the staff to do it. In New Jersey, some schools, but all school districts are not created equal, might have school-based. And they're saying, hey, we have in our school base, we have clinicians. Many of them actually have been trained by the TLC to do response work. So they may not want a team deployed. They're like, we're going to use our own team. We just want to make sure that we're like doing things that in the proper order and in best practice, because we're really big on evidence-based practices. It's not that, oh, psychological first aid is kind of catchy, isn't it? Let's do that. It's because it's been studied. We know it works. This is response work. It's been proven to have positive effects. So that's where we're kind of, I would say anyone could call, but it really kind of comes from the leader of an organization that can make those calls. And in a school, so it's usually like assistant or principal or superintendent.
Okay, so we're specifically talking about youth, and we're speaking a lot today about the response, the post-event situation. So I would like us to just clarify timing. My understanding is that, I'd like you to describe when you normally get called in, but it's probably never too late. And then I'd also like to close maybe with a few destigmatizing ways of speaking about suicide to someone directly, to anyone. Just help us have a more comfort level with this topic as we come to a close today. But first, comment on when the response happens.
So, and what's interesting is the response, we sometimes get called 10 minutes after the school or the agency or the organization just found out. And we are actually their first call before they call even their other employees or tell anyone. So sometimes our involvement can be from the minute they've heard there's a loss. And then other times it could be honestly a week or two after, because the school or the organization thought like, we thought we had this handled, but now we're 2 weeks out and we're still seeing some disruption. We're having a hard time returning back to the routine of what things were like before the loss. So it's really never like too late to call us, but again, it's never really too early either, because, and honestly, we've actually sometimes even been called when there's an anticipated death, like the person has, there's a terminal illness, or they're on life support, and schools have called us to be like, they're saying this isn't looking good. And we start preparing for that loss with the school always praying that it doesn't happen, but knowing that there's a good chance it will. So we've actually been called prior to a loss with the anticipation of that loss happening, just to get people kind of emotionally prepared and geared up. And you're never completely prepared, even when you know it's going to happen. It still hits you, like it stings. And from there, we take it again to see like, what are the needs, and how long will we be there? Because again, not some school districts have more resources, just like your own family. Some family have additional resources, or you're an extended family and you have support from grandparents or aunts and uncles and cousins, and you may not need to go for other outside help because you can rally that support around you. Other people have really great primary physicians and they can help you. And then others have to search a little harder to feel like, who are these other people in my circle that can actually assist me? And when we're talking about assisting, that's really what we're doing. We need to normalize the conversation, getting away a little bit from the focus on mental illness, which we've gotten much better at talking about mental health and mental wellness as opposed to mental illness. And even the mental part, going more towards using the word brain health. When we're talking about suicide too, we've come a long way with even language. You don't hear commit suicide as much as you used to in the past, because you kind of commit, I don't know, tax fraud, you commit a crime, adultery, like you think of commit, it has this negative. You don't commit cancer, you don't commit heart disease, and you don't commit suicide. You die by suicide. You attempt suicide. So in the field, we've also changed some of the language. We've also changed when we're talking about suicides. They used to say, well, that was a successful suicide. I'm like, there's nothing successful about suicide, or that was a successful attempt. I'm like, no, it was either an attempt, and unfortunately, if they die, it was a death by suicide. So with the language, we're trying to take away that stigmatization of being like, this is something that the person did, this is brain health. And if you're in the field of suicidology, you understand that people can be depressed their whole life and some may never have a suicidal ideation. Mm-hmm. People can be anxious their whole life and never have a suicidal ideation. And like Nancy, you had mentioned, you could also be that person who is the helper, who helps everybody else, who always has a smile on their face, who always is like number one. Oh, if I need help, I'm going to Nancy. Like you could be that person. That person still could be at risk. And I think that's the other part that we're getting to when we're talking about it, that it can be anybody. And it's almost like, unfortunately, it's that perfect storm, because the person needs to have access to means. So if we can kind of cut down on what they have access to hurt themselves, to kill themselves, that helps us in the field. But also too, if we can normalize the conversation of asking people, are you okay? And it's okay not to be okay. And you know why it's okay not to be okay? Because at some point, all of us are not okay. But there are resources, there's help. That part of being like, even if you don't know what to say, if you're working with someone who's suicidal, it's okay to say, wow, that seems like a lot's going on. I really don't know what to say, but I will be here beside you. I will stay with you, and we will find somebody who can help. And I think like for that suicidal person, it's almost met with a relief to say like, wait, someone's saying there is help out there. Someone's connection is protection. Someone's saying they'll stay with me. I don't have to be alone. I don't have to keep this secret to myself about how horrible I'm feeling and that I don't want to be here anymore. We also talk about too that most suicidal people really don't want to die. And people are like, what? But that's what suicide is. It's death. And I'm like, they don't want to die. They just at that moment don't see how they're going to get out of the pain. They don't see a solution to that problem that they have identified, that this is never, ever going to get better. And they kind of lose hope. So really what we're working with too is saying like, hey, being in that compassionate present, being that person who can say, I'm okay if you say you're suicidal. I'm not going to run the other way. I'm going to stay with you, and we're going to find somebody or some program or something that will help you. And I think that a lot of times it's just met with relief. Sometimes people say, like, Maureen, what if I ask and the person's not suicidal at all? Don't they get offended? I said, I've never had someone say that they were offended by the question. Most of the time it's met with relief to be like I can actually share with you, like, you're okay asking that question. So that's what I kind of like would like this audience to walk away with, is that you're not going to offend someone I think human beings, we all want to matter. We all want to be noticed. And when people, even if they're not suicidal, but they're like, you notice that I've been really sad, or you notice that I've been really withdrawn, or you notice that I haven't been myself, like, that's validation, that's connection. And ultimately that's going to afford that person the opportunity to maybe share some of the inner thoughts that they were afraid of, like, verbalizing or letting other people know that this is really how much I'm struggling.
Yes. And I love how you talked about the loved one or the friend or the colleague saying, I can help you find resources, and not taking or feeling the responsibility that you have to be the resource. And that is what this show is about. And that is where you said you have the best job in New Jersey. I think I have the second best job on the planet, because as a marketer and the type of marketing that I've done, 99% of what I do is get good information that's out there for people. It could be about something fun. It tends to be more some serious topics. So we're here today really not for the person exactly who is considering death by suicide or is struggling, although certainly that can be helpful, but we're just here to try to encourage people to find ways to normalize any kind of helpful conversation to another human being by just saying, I'm here, I love you, I care about you, and I will help you find resources, not to take it upon themselves. I do want to read a question here, and I think we're going to have to answer it in the comments later. But there's thanks here for mentioning the 988, which is relatively new. Is there a number my best friend can call to prepare for the death of a husband as he reaches end of life? She's very depressed knowing this change is coming. That's a big topic, but I do want to acknowledge that someone asked that.
Yes.
And if there is a quick answer you want to give here, but I think it might be best also to answer him or her.
Yes, I think if they want to email me, or if I can get like some contact information, they can reach out to me and I can send them additional resources, because there are other places like Good Grief that help with the preparation of an anticipated loss. But we can give them more resources specific for their like situation.
Yes, so I'm going to take your contact information and specifically respond to that comment.
Perfect.
Maureen, thank you for so kind of a strange thing to say, but for your enthusiasm in talking about this.
Nancy, thank you.
I can tell you have so much compassion and passion for what you do. And I'm glad there's people like you out there. We're one little state physically, but we are, I think, number 11 in population in the United States. But every state has something like this, and many somethings like this. So, and thank you to those who do watch, either in the first pass here on the live, later as replays, and share this information. I am always grateful when I hear someone comment on something that was deep in the show, and I know they watched. And it is my goal to try to bring information out there, as I said earlier, to help people grow their business through marketing and be healthy and enjoy life, so that we can all have our best chance at good health and longevity. So Maureen, I hope you'll come back and join me. I have a few other folks that we've had on in the past that I can see a really robust conversation with you, and I have some introductions that I want to make to you offline as well. And thank you for taking the time to do that. Again, this is Maureen Brogan. I do want to read the phone number, or actually, can you please just say the phone number aloud so we have it in the audio?
Sure. 732-235-2666. 2810. And if you get an answering machine, you can leave a message, but it will also then give you an after hours number there. So you'll get some kind of redirection if you don't get someone at that number. And also too, I don't know if it's listed, but it's also Maureen.Brogan at Rutgers.edu. So that's another way to reach out to me. If you're saying, hey, I want some resources, we can send you some resources that way. The great thing about it, if we don't have the answer, we know people who do. So that's why I encourage people to like reach out, because you don't talk about suicide all the time. Like I mentioned, I do a lot of mental and brain health stuff. So we have connections. And I really, again, just want to say thank you. Thank you, Nancy.
Okay.
Thank you for your audience, for, again, your courage, your willingness to have this conversation, because when we have conversations, we save lives. So thank you for saving lives.
Thank you.